I was recently kind of organized a meeting with government officials and startup founders and technologists and academics, but this came up, right? And we were discussing this AI mission that the Indian government, the cabinet recently approved. That is about $1 billion. So it's about 10,000 crores, which has been approved by cabinet and would be deployed over the next 5 years.
Data says next couple of years we will probably lose about 80 to 87 million jobs because of AI.
You have a human with a baby's brain, and now the world is trying to train that brain into something which could be amazing, which all of us could use to 10x our productivity so that we can focus on all the creative things.
The government of India wants to have a $1 trillion digital economy, which is 20% of the GDP of India by 25-26 in terms of official targets. Our telecom law was just updated this last year in 2024. The law that regulated before that was in 1885.
Wow.
Anirudh, Amlan, thanks so much for joining on the talk show. This is our pilot episode, and what could be better than talking about AI? A lot of things happening in the world, a lot of things happening in India. So today's episode, we'll focus obviously on a few things. You guys are experts in your own areas. I'm going to introduce you shortly, but the three main areas are going to be what is AI, and how businesses and people are adapting to AI, and how policy changes of AI is impacting the country, right? Going to the introductions, we have Amlan here, who is an independent lawyer, policy advisor, researcher, teacher based in Bangalore. He's been working in tech policy for over a decade. He was previously public policy counsel for Google in India and a corporate lawyer before that. He writes about impact on technology, on society, on his blog, Techlawtopia. That's what it's called. That's a heavy introduction. But if you want to add something to this, I think you've obviously been doing a lot of things recently. I watched some videos on you. You're hosting some really good events. If you want to just add on quickly.
Oh, that's good, Mayur. Yeah, I mean, really excited for this conversation. And it's about, I think, bringing together perspectives about business, about countries, but also about people. So I'd love to see, I think, what our views are about how AI is impacting people at an individual level as well.
Awesome. That's Amlan Mohanty. Then we have Anirudh Narayan, who leads growth at Lyzr.ai. It's a low-code platform to build AI agents specifically for developers. He also founded Everything AI, an AI tool marketplace, and taught AI for founders at Growth School. Previously, Ani, he likes to call himself Ani, so I'm going to say Ani from now onwards. Ani ran a marketing agency and had helped lots of brands in the US and India with growth. Right? So there's a lot of, again, a heavy portfolio. You've been in the business of AI for very long, probably before even AI became famous. Right?
Yeah.
So we have really two strong people in this topic. If you want to add something more apart from the introduction about yourself, what you've been doing more recently.
Yeah. Dude, first of all, thank you for having us. I actually want to bring this up earlier. Dude, Amlan and I know each other from like 10 years back.
Yeah.
And it's crazy that we're coming a full circle.
Good surprise.
This is Mayur bringing us together, so that's cool. And dude, my AI knowledge is as much as when ChatGPT started in November 2022. So like, sure, I think if you spoke to an AI ML expert who's been like doing research, great. But I think anything when it comes to like business use cases, how to use AI to kind of like 10x your productivity, I think those are conversations I could help with. And I mean, what an exciting time for us in terms of AI. I think people are worried. I think there are very polarizing views around AI. So we'll see where this conversation goes.
Absolutely. I mean, just to touch on Amlan is an old friend of mine from school. And I really like doing these shows because I can reconnect with people. And it was very nice of you to accept this talk show. And Ani, we know each other also from the last 5 years now, maybe. Yeah, 5 years.
That's how you get people to your podcast.
But yes, moving to our topic, I think we'll go with you, Ani, because you've been in the AI business. So if you could explain, because we have a lot of viewers, there's a lot of talk on AI and what's AI, like a lot of youngsters talking about it. But if I go and ask my mom, she wouldn't be able to understand this. So if you have to explain it very simple so that we could, for the general viewer, what is AI and kind of how has it evolved in the last couple of years, and explain that for us.
That's a good question. Actually, you brought up your mom. I was talking to my mom today in the morning, and then she was like, I was telling her we're going to do this podcast. And then she's like, I mean, they call me Bittu at home. So like, Bittu, can you build a robot for me, which can take over all my cooking duties? And I was like, for my mom, I think that is AI, right? But in terms of AI, so there are different ways in which I think you can explain AI. I think the simplest way to think about it is you have a human with a baby's brain, and now the world is trying to train that brain into something which could be amazing, which all of us could use to 10x our productivity, automate our workflows, so that we can focus on all the creative things. I have a very positive view of AI. It would be cool to hear from the policy side in terms of how you think about AI. But yes, I think from an infrastructure standpoint or from a application standpoint, I think the way to think about it is people have taken all these data points that's available in the world, they've passed it through like a training model, and it's able to today generate content or code or video or audio text which a human would essentially do. Right? So that's like the subset of generative AI that's really picked up. AI has been around for a while. I mean, the fact that we had Google and then you would say, okay, top 10 online, and then it would give me suggested search, that's essentially artificial intelligence, right? So it's the baseline is more around people are already searched for something. What's the probability of something, the next word or the next sentence that kicks in, right? The reason why AI has really picked up in the last 2-3 years is OpenAI, in some sense, come up with an architecture which has been able to make this breakthrough. Earlier, it could, in some sense, predict words or even like numbers. Today it's gotten to like, it can generate like volumes of data.
So there's more conversation, it's conversational AI basically.
So it's becoming more human-like.
Human-like, yes, Okay, that's I think a good way to put it. Obviously that's on, on the tech side and how AI is kind of moving ahead. But on the other side, it's also the scary part for a lot of people, because for us young people, maybe we look at this in a more positive light, how it's helping us as a business, and if for a lot of sectors, not just on tech side, a lot of sectors this is going to get kicked in, but there has to be a regulator. There has to be someone looking at it and seeing if there's going to be a negative impact, if data can be used in a wrong way, if AI can be used in a wrong way, which has happened. We had news obviously. So that's where I think Amlan comes in. So before we obviously move on the AI side, I think just to go a little historical on the tech policies, because we've had some tech policies in India, and now it's this age of talking about tech policies on AI. But so if you want to talk a little bit on global tech policies historically, then we could go to India after that.
Sure. Look, this is obviously a very fascinating conversation for me. I think and read and talk about AI, I think, at every dinner conversation these days. So it's good to be talking to old friends about this. Look, I thought your explanation for AI was very interesting. The way that I kind of simplify it is AI is a machine that thinks and acts like a human does. That's the vision of AI, right, for me. And that's a pretty scary thought, right? You are basically creating, like you said, they're babies now, they will be adults, and probably indistinguishable from humans in some activities is really the idea. Right, and we'll talk about this more in the context of what artificial general intelligence is, right? Another kind of form of AI. And so you really need to think about how these technologies should be governed. And this is not unique to AI. We've had this in the past, right? Anytime there's a new fascinating technology, we had this with the internet, we had this with nuclear, we have this with space technologies. So, there has been a history of thinking about technologies that are very powerful and what we should be doing about it as a society, right? But let me tell you what I think is very unique about regulating technology, right? I'm a technology lawyer. I've been in this space for over a decade. I think there are like 3 things that really make regulating technology or governing technology so unique. One is just the pace of innovation, right? The fact that laws are always having to catch up with technology.
Right.
We're seeing this often in the EU or in other parts of the world where they pass a law and then in 3 months from that, like, hey, but you haven't addressed this particular kind of Gen AI thing, right? You're talking about AI, but what about Gen AI? Now we'll talk about what about, agents as AI as agents, right? So this idea that the law and technology are already kind of battling, but the technology always seems to be 2 steps ahead is one thing that's very unique about technology regulation. 2 is that, to be able to regulate technology, you have to have a deep understanding of how the technology works, right? And I think, again, this is very unique for policymakers to, every policymaker cannot be an engineer, right? So how do we ensure that the policies we're building for technology are really informed by the people who are building that technology, who understand kind of how it works, right? And the other, I think, third thing, which is, I think you alluded to in your introduction, which is, there's this great opportunity. Ani is very optimistic about it. But all technology is a dual-use technology, right? Especially artificial intelligence, which means it can be used in a good way and in a bad way, right? It's like a knife, right? You can use it to cook, you can use it to murder someone. Yeah. So how should we be thinking about AI in this context, right? There's opportunity and there's risk. And really that comes down to, right? So these are the 3 things that I think are so unique about tech regulation broadly. And when you think about AI, we're going to have those same conversations, right? What's the opportunity? What's the risk? What's the trade-off, right? What are we trying to promote? What do we want to protect against? And you were asking about globally, kind of what are the examples of this? Take the example of encryption, right? WhatsApp is, they say it's end-to-end encrypted. What does that mean? That means nobody can read the text that's being sent between 2 people. But we had to have that conversation about, is that legal? What if somebody is trying to planning, organizing a crime, right? When should governments have access to that, right? So there's a trade-off between privacy and, let's say, security, right? We've had to have that conversation. With, internet platforms like YouTube, you want to create content like this podcast, it's so great that you can just, upload this and it's accessible to, potentially millions of people in the world. So that's promoting freedom of speech. But then, that can create problems, right? It can be offensive speech, it can be obscene speech, it can impact people's privacy. So you have to draw that balance, and there need to be laws to kind of allow people to take it down, to report it. So we're going to have that conversation about, balancing the trade-offs in the context of AI.
Sure. Awesome. So I think, like one thing I want to kind of touch upon was India went through its own kind of tech policies, right? Some highlights. I know we had something on the internet. So do you want to touch about some small bits where we really had some landmark judgments, which is kind of helping the policy side?
Yeah, I think just maybe to preface that, right, why technology is so important to India, right? It's really, we're seeing this again, even in the political manifestos, we're, in the midst of an election right now. If you see, every political party has technology central to its kind of manifesto. It's a very clear economic target. The government of India wants to have a $1 trillion digital economy, which is 20% of the GDP of India by 25-26 in terms of official targets, right?
What does that mean when you say digital economy?
That's a good question, but it would essentially mean a combination of how services that are being exported are goods and services. There's electronic components, right? So there's manufacturing of digital products, phones.
So all that put together would come into the economy.
That's the digital economy, right? And obviously you can argue about how that should be defined, but that's 20% of what India's GDP is. So that's why technology is so central to how the government is thinking about the larger kind of economy. And also you realize there's so much startup activity. India is a global market, is an important market for global businesses. Technology companies are all setting up offices here. So you realize that technology is really central. And so the government really has to think about what is the right regulatory architecture to promote these businesses, to support them, but also to ensure that, safety and, citizens' rights are protected. So, it has obviously over a period of time thought about it. Right now, to be completely honest, it's a patchwork of different laws and regulations, a lot of which are outdated. So, I mean, the great example is our telecom law was just updated this last year in 2024. The law that regulated before that was in 1885.
Wow.
So we had up till 2023, we had this thing called the Telegraph Act that was regulating all telecom infrastructure. Right now, you're talking about AI, which we're talking about, these robots and agents and all that. The law that is regulating AI today is from the 2000. So people realize that you need to kind of keep updating laws. So I would say some of the big milestones, right?
Net neutrality, I think, was one.
Is a big one. That's a great example. India has one of the strongest laws on net neutrality. And just to, TLDR on net neutrality is essentially nobody can discriminate, right, in terms of how, in terms of internet speed or latency or quality of service based on what type of content it is. So you can't say Netflix content will be cheaper or faster versus some other type
Weren't
of
there
content.
some laws for like Facebook?
Yes.
Like the
When
hamper.
Facebook came, free basics, they were trying to introduce this product, and the government said, no, you can't do that, right? You can't make it free to be able to access only Facebook service.
But that's a landmark, I think, I think a law which was passed, and I think we will probably come similar situations now with, with AI. Yes, it's going to happen. Yeah. So, wholesome thoughts. I think Amlan has a lot of thoughts coming through. We will.
I feel like I have some clarifying questions for Amlan, but yeah.
But before we go completely deep into the policy and the impact of it, we'll just go back, take a step back, and move to Ani on asking something about what is the AI stack, right? Because there's a lot of people kind of talking about building around. So if you want to just kind of
Yeah. So I think when you talk about AI infrastructure, right, I think the way to think about it is how are people building applications or agents. Like agents is the cool word. Earlier it used to be called bots. They're called agents now because it can kind of do autonomously, like it can do tasks. You don't have to keep following up on things. So I think that's one. But I think the base layer to think about the whole AI infrastructure is like, let's take NVIDIA. They're the ones giving you GPUs. I think the reason why they are thriving over, let's say, Intel is they have designed their chips in a really good way to handle compute, right? So because the manufacturing is still happening in China, but they are the ones who have designed really smart and sophisticated chips. So that's their base layer, right? And now all these big players, so you have, let's call them foundational layers. You have the Googles of the world, Google, Amazon, and then you have, what's the other one? Facebook, right? So they are the ones who are like, hey, I'm going to buy all these chips from them. So they've spent anywhere between $25 billion to $75 billion to buy chips from NVIDIA, right? So why are they doing that? They finally want to be like, hey, I want to finally still sell my cloud services, right? I still want people to continue hosting on my cloud, right? So so they have built relationships with large language models or built their own large language models. So OpenAI, what have they done? It was initially supposed to be OpenAI, but now there's a lot of flag. I mean, like Elon Musk got sued them because they're not open anymore, right? But Microsoft partnership with OpenAI, Gemini is under Google, Claude with or Anthropic with Amazon, right? So you have that layer, and then the next comes the large language models, which I mentioned, right? So in the large language model foundational layer, you have people building open source stuff. So there are platforms like Hugging Face, which is like people like you and me have built out like, let's say a small model, like a 2.5, 3 billion parameter model to, let's say, like specifically for video or audio text, right? So they're like open source models. And there are these like closed source models, like let's say OpenAI, right? Now, above that is the data layer, right? So the first piece was the foundation, the second is the data layer. Now we all have, I mean, data was the backbone of like how Google was built, right? So now everybody has data, but that data is, let's say, unstructured. Everyone needs to like structure it in a way, convert it to a vector format for these LLMs to understand. So you have lots of players in the data space. Then after that comes the deployment, which is where the GenAI apps are being kind of like created. So we come in that space, right? We're giving you a framework to build GenAI apps.
which is Lyzr.
Lyzr, you have companies like LangChain. So in that space, players are competing saying, hey, I'll give you complete open source customizable stuff. We are saying, hey, we'll give you some pre-built.
But I think this is a great way to explain it, because even for me, I was always confused. These layers kind of make sense. So you have, if you want to summarize it, you have the chip manufacturers in the first layer. The next is
you have the models of the world, right? Then you have the models of the world. Actually, between those two, also a lot of players were like, hey, I'm trying to fine tune the model, right? Then comes the data layer. In the data layer is companies trying to structure data, companies trying to make sure you can convert into vector format, then storage of that vector format, right? So vector databases, if you want to call it. Then after the data layer is actually called the deployment layer, where we are helping you deploy. Then finally, people are building applications on top, right? So this is mostly on the enterprise AI stack. Now companies are directly also saying, oh, I'm SaaS, I will build directly with an LLM, I'll build a nice UI, UX to it. I'll make sure my input or my prompt is really good. And then you're able to, so there are a lot of, they're called wrappers today, right? They're like ChatGPT wrappers in some sense.
Thanks, Sunny. I think these layers were really insightful on on how AI is actually structured, because there's a lot of confusion. AI is just one word, but then you clearly explained all these layers. Do you want to tell us a little bit more on where India stands in these layers? Which part of these layers Indian companies have filled, and what's the potential in filling some layers?
Sure. So I think the way to think about it is core competency and deep technical knowledge to get into from the lowest part of the stack to the highest part of the stack, right? So the way to think about like the Bay Area and let's say everything that's happening in the Valley, you have such an overlap between research, education, and entrepreneurship. Like I know a couple of entrepreneurs, ex-Stanford professors that have started Voyage.ai. They've raised $17 million. Or anyway, I think many already $17 million. So it's very easy for them because they have that core deep knowledge to do things which is closest to the bottom of the stack, right? Then I think as you move further east, right, then you're seeing New York kind of play in all these different layers. I think with India, we have a lot of obviously like solid, smart engineers. I think for some reason we're doing a lot more on the application layer,
Which is on the top.
which is more on the top, right? You have some players who are like in the application layer, there's like this integrations layer as well, where like, hey, I need to connect different apps. We're also doing a lot more around services. So companies want to implement Gen AI. Hey, how do I connect the LLM? How do I structure the data? How do I add a UI UX? So you're seeing that as well. There are a couple of players. Obviously, Ola came out with the LLM.
Actually, I want to talk. I want to talk a little bit more on that because there's a lot of buzz going around Kritrim, right?
Sure.
Kritrim is, it's focused on foundational AI models, AI cloud infrastructure, and silicon for AI. I think these are three keywords which they're using, and they're saying their mission is to enable each of the 1.4 billion plus Indian consumers, developers, entrepreneurs, and enterprises by putting the power of AI in their hands. So I think the mission is quite strong. But honestly, where are we here? I mean, are we close to what the mission is? Like how far we are from, the Bay Area?
Right. So I think the way to think about it is there is absolute merit in building something local, right? Like, because ChatGPT or OpenAI supports 97 different languages, but like within the Indian diaspora, the ecosystem, we have like 35 languages, right? So it's not just Kritrim, it's even Sarvam. They raised 41 mil, I think I forgot whether it's Lightspeed or Matrix. Oh, sorry, Lightspeed. They're focused on building the entire stack. So they will start with one layer, but it's like, oh, now I will also have a vector database. I will also have the application layer, right? So India is not very far, but it's like for every 2 startups which is in India, you'll have, let's say, 25, 30 in the Bay Area. That's doing something like that.
I was thinking it's the other way around because here we do have a lot more companies, but you're saying the ratio is almost 10 times more.
I think a good analogy is crypto. Like, I don't know, remember the crypto movement, which is, so we have lots of crypto users, a lot of people using AI, but how many people truly built like Bitcoin, like, cryptography or the blockchain, right? Lot more in the US, lot more maybe in China. Similar. Lot more folks trading in crypto in India, right? So I think with AI, lot of Indian startups on the application layer.
Correct.
Right? So they are trying to do distribution quickly, trying to like focus on specific use cases or niches. But we're not far. I think we're more like there's a core competency difference, and then but from an adoption standpoint, the application layer, dude, we are now serving the US market as well.
Yeah. So there was I think few key points. One is obviously we have varied culture. There's a lot of languages. There's also the way you talk and let's say generative AI, the text, right? Culturally in India, it's different. English also is very different.
Nuances.
What is spoken in the US or in the Western countries, it's very different here. Our English is different. So probably I think Kritrim and any other companies which are trying to do what GPT is doing is to focus on these bits, which I think, moving to Amlan here, because this is where I think the policy level starts kicking in. This is on the layer of doing all the foundational models, new languages. Where do you kind of see in the next couple of years? Because now the aggression is going ahead, right? On India supposedly want to build these models. And you mentioned earlier also, like policy is always catching up, right? So where do you kind of see when someone like this starts aggressively going? How would policy kind of catch up with these different languages, different?
Yeah. Ani and I were just talking offline about this as well. We started with this idea of regulation, right? Regulation has this negative connotation. It's like you're trying to constrain the innovation. So, we really need to think about, yes, regulation one piece, but there's another piece of it which is enabling the ecosystem to develop. So let's maybe spend some time thinking about what India is doing to enable AI innovation, right? So I should mention that I was recently kind of organized a meeting with, government officials and startup founders and technologists and academics where this came up, right? And we were discussing this AI mission that the Indian government, the cabinet recently approved. That is about $1 billion. So it's about 10,000 crores, which has been approved by cabinet and going to be deployed over the next 5 years. And there are 7 pillars, right? You can read about this online, but really it's a holistic strategy. It's about building that compute stack. So nearly half of that, 4,000 crores is dedicated towards building what they call as compute capacity. So it's the chips, it's the underlying networking hard infrastructure on top of which, these applications can be built. So they're dedicating some resources towards that. Then there is something about data. You realize like data is really important, so they're dedicating resources towards that. Then there's about skilling and talent, right? So the point I really want to make is when you think about what India should do and 5 years from now, you have to think about what are the different ingredients or elements that will go into making India successful, right? It's going to be capital, right? And where's that capital going to come from? Some of it will be public investment from taxpayers. So we need to think about as a society, as a citizen, how much we want to contribute towards this larger vision. Two, and capital can come from VCs, right? So there's private investment as well. Two is compute, right? Which is the underlying infrastructure, right? So where is that capacity? How much capacity do we need, right? And to use that capacity for what? I think is going to be an important question. The other third kind of element is talent and skills, right? I've heard some government officials talk about how there are only 300 people in the world who can build these large language models, right? Like the ones that OpenAI and Google have built. And apparently about 20 or 30 of them are Indian. So there's this perspective and they're thinking about how we're seeing all of these Indian CEOs, right, lead these global companies. So how can we get these Indians, even if they're living in Germany or the US, Europe, to build for India? They don't even have to maybe come back, but give them the resources, give them capital, give them compute. And the other element, and maybe we should talk about this, is data, right? To be able to build the right use case anywhere in the stack, you need to have the relevant data sets, right? As anyone, it's a very important part of the AI stack. So where is this data going to come from? Who's going to provide it? The government has this plan to build this data sets platform. So I think we have to think about this more holistically. The government has allocated 10,000 crores. Over the next 5 years, let's see how that shapes.
I think you made two good points. One is, this is a great fact. I didn't know this, that only 300 people can actually be doing these foundation model AIs, and 20 of them are Indians. So two questions. I know there is one more company which is founded by an Indian, Perplexity. So we'll come to that in a second. But before that, I want to talk a little bit on the chip manufacturing, because we have a lot of chat around, India wants to build chips, and NVIDIA stock shot up. We've been seeing that. No, I'm not. Unfortunately, I wish I was. Late to get it now. It's already crossed $1,000, I think. And because they have the graphic processors to enable AI computing, right? So what is India's potential here? Because on one question, maybe like on your side is where we are, if any chip manufacturing, and on the policy level, like is India trying to get some policies in place, get some things in place so that there is more comfort for chip manufacturers to come and invest in India and look at this?
Yeah. Maybe I can go first, right? In terms of how the government's seeing about it. So government, obviously this is important. They have this India semiconductor mission. They're doing things like PLI schemes where it's, we'll give you a subsidy if you're planning to set up. So, it's worked in some ways. Tata recently announced a 16 billion investment in chips in partnership with this Taiwanese company called TSMC. So, there is an Indian foreign kind of collaboration in the chip space. I just heard Zoho, the company, is also looking at chips. So it's really,
it's 100 million investment.
Yeah, so I was going to come to that because these are very capital intensive kind of things to manufacture. You need to have fabs. Intel's been struggling with this in India for a long time. So you need to have the right infrastructure in place, the right equipment. A lot of these specialized equipment, is only manufactured by one company in the world, based in the Netherlands. It's called ASML. So you might have again the capital, the talent, but if you don't have the equipment to build the chips, right? So I think where the government currently is at, and it's the pragmatic view, is that perhaps you can't be building the very advanced GPUs that NVIDIA is building, which they say is 3 nanometers, and but maybe we can start with a 28 nanometer chip, right? Those are CPU. You can use them for CPUs in your cars, in some kinds of devices. Maybe not for AI, but really try and build that capacity over a period of time, right? So I think that's really where the government.
And you said, earlier you said 1 billion is the budget kind of put in. Do you think that's enough? Because talking about the Netherlands company, one machine I read cost 200 million, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the level of cost.
Yeah.
And 1 billion is a very tiny number.
And I think you're getting to a really good point is, if we are saying the budget should be increased, let's think more strategically as a country why this is important. So, there's this idea of what's called sovereign AI, right? Based on this idea of sovereignty, that India needs its own. You said India should build its local model. Why? It should have its own chips built in India. Why, right? And, kind of in my conversations with people, they say, you need to have control, right? The Indian government need to have control in a physical sense. Where are these chips located, right? If it's serving a military use case, right? Or it's serving a very sensitive use case around health or finance, you want to have it in a physical environment that you have control over, right? Two is you want to have technical control. You want to know, what are the different weights of the models. You want to know what kind of data went in. So you want to have technical control over it. Right. Third is you might want to have financial control over it. So you've actually invested, so you have a little bit more control over it, right? And fourth is from a governance and perspective is, if they are Indian companies, it's more likely they will kind of obey the law, right? So you want to be able to have a sovereign AI across the entire stack. So that means having Indian, chips, Indian models, Indian applications, Indian data. So maybe that's the vision.
Yeah, and possibly we are quite hard on India, but as a country, I think we are far ahead of many because at least we are there in some layers, and we're talking about how to kind of fill the other layers, right? So moving to the question of Perplexity, which who is in Indian
Arvind something, I forgot his last name, but he started Perplexity.
So Indian founder, going back to just 20 people, like 20 Indians here, kind of building this, and I call themselves the Google killer. They also are competing with ChatGPT, right? So what's with Perplexity? Sorry. Can you tell us a little bit more how different they are from?
So actually, when they first came out, by the way, this guy I think went to Berkeley. Arvind went to Berkeley 2007, 2011.
And IIT Madras before that. So there's an Indian connection.
Yeah, but it's interesting, right? You go there, and I think there's some level of exposure that you have, which is just like versus India, which is like I don't know that I don't know. Whereas there, it's like it almost feels like I'm at the bleeding edge of that innovation, right? So they're able to maybe create and like find people to make that happen. But I think with Perplexity, when they came out initially, it was the reason why they call themselves the Google killer, which I think from a marketing anchor is quite interesting. Is you're able to have conversations with your search and it gives you sources and citations and things like that. By the way, ChatGPT is caught up.
Yeah.
It also now started giving you sources with links, right? So, but what they have done well is now I'm trying to integrate with enterprises. You can build your own like knowledge search within your enterprise with my data, right? So yeah, I mean like there are players now. Perplexity is doing that. Claude is doing that. So the search conversational interface with the citation is not hot or new anymore. But that's I feel like all these players are going to kind of hit that level, right? Like when ChatGPT came out, it was like, oh my God, this is amazing model it's beating all these capabilities and these benchmarks. Now you have Llama 3 and Claude actually beating those benchmarks as well, right? So,
but yeah, I think the more the merrier in this field because competition kind of is healthy to push each other, and in the end the consumer is going to benefit.
But can I add just one more thing on the AI piece? What's happening with LLM models is it's becoming commoditized in terms of performance. You're going to have, if you have ChatGPT provides something, you'll have like 20 other players doing that. The way now AI startups or companies can kind of differentiate themselves is, do you have distribution? How well can I integrate that AI into my workflow, right? And
so we're going to pull ourselves back to India again, so we can focus on what's the impact, right? So moving to you, Amlan, we had this question: what data can the Indian government truly open up with protection, right? Unstructured, structured, and how would AI help organize a database of information that will help do a kind of a self-service? Because I think as much as we want to see on policies on this thing, but in the end, like, what's going to be the benefit to the nation?
Yeah, I almost want to maybe parry this question to Anirudh because, right, it's important to think about what's the data that companies today need and want, right? Because data is not this thing in vacuum. You mentioned it earlier, right? All of these models need to be customized for the Indian context. So it really needs to be local language data, right? It needs to be refined, cleaned up, right? Reflecting Indian values and cultures, right? There was this situation that came up earlier when Google launched this Gemini product, right? And they'd ask a prompt about a certain public figure in India, and it would make an odd response, right? And that's the kind of what they'll confess is that is because our models were not trained on relevant data in India. So I would actually ask you, what do you think the kind of ecosystem in India wants, and then we can answer the policy question of what the government should do.
I think a good way to think about it is like, what's the black box or information that I don't have today that I seek, right? Like in terms of political, right? It could be, right, elections happening. I want to know who should I be voting for, and that needs to be a conversation. I don't know how to access that information. And if you look at Bangalore or any other city, like the number of small like micro providers is so fragmented, right? There's Bescom for electricity. There's Bescom for electricity, BWS for water, right? I don't know who to get in touch with. What's the conversation I need to have? And I think it's become super easy to build an agent today, to build something conversational from an AI standpoint. Developers today want to know where can I access this data across my city infrastructure.
I think that's a very good example, actually, which is a real world problem.
Right? A governance use case, right? There are some existing databases the government has put out, right? Data.gov, right? Datasets platform. In my viewing of it, I'm not a coder, of course, but I wanted to understand from a policy perspective. It seemed not intuitively useful, right? It would be like, data about foreign travelers between 2000 to 2016 that have landed in Kempegowda International Airport. Something like that, right? Now, that in isolation might not be useful, but if you're building a travel app, maybe that's a relevant data set. So what I've heard government officials I speak to say is like, let's identify the use case. What do you want to use the AI for? And then let's figure out the relevant data sets, right? And you can collect that data, you can create that data, you can source that data, but if you want to build a health-based AI product, right? The data sets have to relate to healthcare. It needs to be from diagnostic labs. You need to aggregate this. And maybe because I'm also trying to come from a policy perspective, I'll talk about the important legal and regulatory safeguards you need to have. You can't just collect data and there are important privacy risks, right? So, how do you anonymize that data? So it is no longer identifiable to a particular person, right? And especially if it's sensitive data around health, around financial data. So let's keep the citizen, the consumer front and center. Say there is this very important use case, which we think can provide some positive impact at a social scale, but let's be very mindful of what the kind of safeguards around that.
I think this is probably a good example because you have a problem of someone wanting to know, but the government also like, what should I expose you to, right, in terms of data, and which I think is also can be filled as a gap with.
Can I add one more thing? I feel like a lot of developers today, or like people are building, to your point, I think they don't know what to build. So even if the government could say, these are the use cases we want built, right? Here is the data. We would ideally want this, man. If you market it in a decent way, man, you'll have lots of kids from IITs, NIT, doesn't matter. They'll come and they'll want to build for you open source for free. Right?
I have two things about this. One is, we also recommend these things to government. Have an innovation challenge. Have a hackathon, right, in certain areas and see which ones emerge. And the other joke that I hear from some people is make it a ranking-based system, like an AIR rank. Give people ranks, and then the parents will also support the kids. Like, I want you to get rank 1 in this AI hackathon challenge for the representing India. So I think there are some incentives we can build to identify those good use cases. What I've heard from people building is, when you have the use case, the data will kind of emerge.
Correct.
I think, in conclusion, someone in the government is listening to this. There is a lot of potential on both ends, on the government side to expose the right data and kind of make it easier for people to develop and consumers to kind of use this data to build things from there.
Do we have a CTO for India? Like the CTO for Indian government?
Yeah, I've heard some names. But I mean, the question is again, what does the CTO do, right? It is about creating this vision, right? We want these use cases in these sectors. This is how we should build it, make it open, make it accessible. I think, there is this important
Yeah.
vacuum that somebody can fill.
Awesome. So moving, I think there's probably a bit more here, but we understand that there is the gap, and moving from there towards again something which is impacting our lives on a day-to-day level, on jobs mainly, right? So I want to talk a little bit on the impact, because impact, yeah. So the impact is, we did have some revolutions before. One example was Industrial Revolution, where a lot of impact of jobs because of machines which came in, right? That was mostly on the blue-collar workforce. And AI, we're already seeing it. It's happening every day, and the pace, in which it's happening is really fast. With Industrial Revolution, it still takes time to build a machine and it gets time to install, run it. So there was some kind of transition, but I think AI is moving really at a rapid pace. And the impact on the white-collar jobs this time is quite high. Data says next couple of years we will probably lose about 80 to 87 million jobs because of AI. There's also another data set which says we're going to generate about 90 million jobs. So it's kind of evening out there. Then there is another 5-year data set which says we're going to lose about 300 million jobs. So I think there's still speculation. There's a lot of speculation around this. But talking about jobs, I think, maybe directing first to Ani. You've now working in a company which is really into AI, and that's kind of created jobs, right? So what's your take on this? Like, where is the job level seen?
Good question. So we have, I think first of all, when we put out job description itself, it's like, hey, if you were able to use these tools, it's a plus, right? So I think the first piece is on the upskilling. Are you ready to kind of get out of your inertia and say, I want to upskill and get there? Because I will most probably want to hire someone who knows a little bit about AI versus someone who doesn't know about AI.
Yeah.
Right? So lots of jobs are being created, and I'm very bullish about it, because let's take this podcast, right? If you had to break this podcast down, we're recording this content.
Yeah.
You'll have somebody who'll edit.
Yeah.
Somebody will break it down into shorts. Now you'll have, let's say, 2-3 clips that you can do. The AI tool in some sense should break it down, redistribute it, repurpose across platforms, and you should be able to create more content.
Yeah.
So humans at the core of it, we are supposed to be creative, and can each of us learn that, hey, this is the tools that's available for you to get better. I think what's happening now, it's like you're comparing it to the Industrial Revolution. I actually compare it to going online. Like, we have to be trained to move online, right? Like, it's inevitable, which is a good thing. The problem is, whose onus is it on to educate? Right? Is it like, as a business, I can be like, hey, I want to move quickly, I need to hire some people.
Yeah.
But I can't be like, hey, here's a course. I could do some stuff like that. Yeah. But the ecosystem kind of needs to move towards that. But it'll come down to humans who know AI versus humans who don't know AI.
I think
in each of your niches, I think.
Yeah. That makes sense. Like, I guess the issue is also more situational, because right now India is probably going through a good percentage of adult jobless rate, right? And AI coming in is going to only impact this further higher. We have some data also that this is one of the lowest recruitment seasons in IIT Bombay, which is one of the most premier institutes in India, where people would get recruited very easily, and that's kind of a sign which there is strain, there are some cracks. Like what you're saying, it's on the policy level and on the government level. I think there needs to be a lot of changes done on how education should probably progress, and very quickly, right? Because we don't have time. If we go by the 300 million job loss in the next 5 years, which obviously is a global number, but India is a high population country, and we will probably lose. And there are a lot of jobs outsourced to India. Sure. We're still like a country which has a lot of jobs outsourced. So you have TCS, you have Infosys, which is really pushing out a lot of work for other countries. How much of these jobs, because these are big job creators, right? If you look at AI coming in more rapid pace, these companies will not be able to hold these traditional jobs, right?
To add to your point, right? For example, Accenture booked, I think, $2.4 billion in revenue, which is higher than ChatGPT of $2 billion last year. And so all these companies, I went for another event where Wipro is like, hey, we used to sell implementation of IT, now we'll sell implementation of AI, right? So our tech movement, all our service players will crush it. Like, they will figure a way out. And I'm having so many conversations with service providers where they don't need to have AI ML knowledge to build Gen AI applications. right? So they will help, they will make more money. Initially, let's say if the average order value of a service was like $50,000 to $100,000 for like a 2-month setup, now it's like $300,000. So there's actually more money that will pump into the IT services
Got it.
layer.
Because they're building this higher level layer, which we.
Yeah. So I think the IT folks will get educated. I think what we have to also start thinking about is where is the capital being deployed? There's so much money being deployed in capital. So much money being deployed in AI. Why wouldn't you want to go there? Because that's where the jobs will get created.
Yeah.
Instead of thinking, oh, AI is a bad rep. Yeah. So I think that's what people should not think about, not make it personal. So I'm going to lose my job to AI, right? It's a good time for you to like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. I think because I think we are a large country with large population. So, and we really depend on jobs which AI is actually kind of replacing. A lot of the jobs, especially in cities like Bangalore. Maybe, if you take the whole country as a whole, I mean, it's not, but if you take the taxpayers' money, the ones who actually contribute to the direct taxes, it all comes from these major cities, which are tech jobs, right? So it is going to have a significant impact on the money which the government is going to receive. But what's your take, Amlan, on the jobs and where I think we could go on like an education policy level? What changes we could look at, or is there something which is happening which we don't know?
Yeah, I think one way to think about it is that AI will take over some tasks and to not think about them taking over jobs, right? Because like you said, we've had these, industrial revolutions. This is, a new era we're entering. But I think, it would be naive to think that all of our jobs will instantly get replaced. It will be iterative and, there will be some part of this entire content generation process. In the example you took, right? Editing maybe, right? It's going to be taken over by an AI. But does that mean this editor is out of a job? No, you will still want his creative input in terms of how do you piece it together? What's the right choice? Obviously there are other parts of their entire value chain where they can operate in. They have a larger holistic view. So my view is two parts, right? You talked about education policy, but just to start about, at an individual level, right? How should we be thinking about it? And I'm writing this piece, which should be out by the time maybe this podcast episode is out. It's called "Can ChatGPT Think?" Right? Which is really this kind of exploration of what is so unique about us as humans, right? And you realize it's these things, right? Like our ability to think creatively, right? Our ability to have a lived experience in the physical world, right? To have social connections, to empathize with people, right? To build on, our existing kind of knowledge base based on our conversations, experience with other people. So it's very interpersonal in that way. And I think those things can never be taken over by AI, right? So my suggestion to people, how do you adapt to this, is to live more, right? To be out there in the physical world, have more kind of stimulating conversations, experiences, shared experiences, relationships, and bring that to your kind of job, right? Because that's something that AI can never be able to fulfill. And on the policy side, I think, the government should be thinking in similar lines, which is obviously there's a delta, right, around where human kind of skills and abilities and competencies beat AI. How can we double down on that, right? How can we allow people to increase their capacity to think creatively, bring that to the job force? There is a very kind of narrow way we can think about skilling in terms of, okay, these are some certifications around AI, but I think we need to move beyond that to a much more holistic view of what makes humans different from machines, and to try and promote that more and more.
Awesome. And one more thing, because I know you were part of this, you hosted this discussion, which was really interesting. We'll probably put out a link for them to see your discussion, which you hosted as an event. It was with
the Global Tech Summit?
Yeah, the Global Tech Summit with Indian External Affairs Minister and Ministry, sorry.
Yeah, it's coordinated with the
Yeah, so you want to talk a little bit, because I think that was a very interesting event. You had people from different parts come in on a global level, because I think that gave it was probably, if a common person sees it, it's a little too complex.
Yeah.
If you could kind of break down that event, and then maybe people who are interested could view it, I think that also gives a good insight on.
Yeah, I think the question you're asking is how should India approach this entire question of kind of AI policy and regulation, right? I would, break it down to some first principle questions, right? Which is, firstly, why does India want to regulate AI, right? What are the strategic objectives? We've talked about, for example, promoting and incentivizing the local AI system, right? To maybe promote exports, to be a part of the global AI marketplace, right? So that's a good reason for why. Two is to really identify some very harmful use cases, right? Is it about AI being used in recruitment where somebody, operating systems differently? So why have a separate law for AI? So just apply existing laws to AI, right? So you're regulating use cases, right, of AI, applications of AI rather than AI, right? Then there's a question of, how to regulate, and globally there are different approaches, right? At the root is some principles that people want AI developers to follow around fairness, transparency, accountability, equality, right? So these are kind of principles that we need to translate them into laws. How you should do that kind of differs from kind of country to country. You can have a kind of a very voluntary principle-based approach, or a very strict rules-based approach. So it's up to us as a society to decide what makes sense for India. And the last piece is who should kind of regulate this, right? And I think really that this is a talk show about citizens. We need to think about what this all means for the citizen. If AI, and I'm obviously in an optimistic camp, I'm a techno optimist in that sense, but I realize that technology can go wrong. We've seen with social media there are very harmful effects. So if something goes wrong, right, who is it that I as a consumer, as a citizen can go to have my problem addressed, right? When my loan app is rejected because an AI, who can I go to and ask, was it rejected? Why was it rejected, right? Or in the there's AI being used in the judicial context, right? My bail application is approved or rejected based on AI. I disagree with that. Can I go and can I get compensation for a... So I think we need to think about the who, what, how, right? And why. As ways to think about from an Indian context.
There's actually one more concept, I think, from a citizen's perspective, is how do you get social media channels to regulate the content that's created by AI, right? Like today, AI has hit a level where I can have the president or a prime minister speak exactly and then have misused content being distributed, right? And the problem is there's always a small, or maybe a decent sized population that is not able to differentiate between that content. And that might have to come down to businesses or even at a political level.
I think one question, but for both of you, probably in your area, what are the things you see which you're happy India is doing, and also what are things you feel a little frustrated it's not moving fast enough?
From a policy side or more broadly?
Policy side, let's say.
Well, I am happy that the government is taking a cautious approach, that they want to think about India in terms of what India's cultural, business kind of needs are, so they're not rushing to regulate AI. And two, so I appreciate that. In terms of what could be done more, I think, this idea that the industry and the government need to be talking more often and more regularly to be able to create a good AI governance framework, right? As I mentioned earlier, you need regulation to keep up with technology. The only way you can do that is for government policymakers to talk to the people building the technology at a regular. What's the new innovation? Tell me 2 years from now, what should I be thinking about, right? So that, and vice versa, right? Industry people need to talk to the government to say, okay, what are the problems you're finding, right? So I talked earlier about how India should be thinking about what are the most harmful use cases that in the Indian context. So industry people should be talking to government and saying, what is your data showing? Is it about financial frauds are occurring? So we need to deploy AI for financial fraud. Is it happening in this particular, for agriculture? What is your data showing about how farmers want to use AI, right? So this dialogue between industry and government needs to be more. And it's happening, but maybe more.
Probably needs, I think.
Well said.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I think it needs almost like a CTO to.
I think Mayur is angling for a CTO of India job. I think, and more conversations like this, just to have people talk about this, I think that could be another thing that'll be helpful.
That's a great.
And once you talk about it, I feel like how do you communicate that to the developer audience so that we're in the loop? I feel like today, is it in our country as a DNA to market this and articulate, say, hey, this is available, this is the conversations happening? Because sometimes it can feel like, hey, like a few players got to know about it and then we got lost in the mix, right? So, but I think honestly, I'm very proud of what India is doing otherwise, right? So.
On a business level, I think there's a lot going on. So I think, as I said earlier, probably we're hard on some things, but I feel that we are in a very good position as well. What's your final take on what you kind of see on AI, and what's your final take? Where do you want to see yourself? Because I think you started your job in Google, where you were, it was not much before AI, and now you are, policy advisor on AI. You're working as a consultant. You write a lot about AI. Is this something you would continue to do, and like you kind of move in that direction? It gives you a lot of like where do you see it?
I think AI is a revolutionary technology. That's why I'm in this space. That's why we're having this conversation. That's why we're so excited about this, right? So for me, that's the starting point. Like, there are a few technologies that have completely kind of blown my mind. The internet, crypto and blockchain, and AI is there. So that's why I'm in this space. In terms of kind of what I'm excited for, looking forward to. I'm actually thinking of just as a person, as an individual. How will I use AI in my life, right? I'm an independent kind of solopreneur, as you call it. So I really appreciate and look forward to this idea of these AI agents being able to increase my productivity, right? So I'm really looking forward to a future where I'm going to be able to leverage AI. I'm not worried about AI. I don't have fear about AI, but I'm able to master the skills and tools required to be able to make me live the best version of myself. That's what I'm excited about.
Awesome. And on the business side, like what's your kind of take, Ani? Like what's kind of exciting for you, and then where do you kind of see yourself?
I think I'm supremely excited about things going multimodal. So today we're just chatting. Tomorrow we'll be speaking. I think I'm going to say day after like 10, 15 years from whenever,
Maybe day
fast that is. Yeah. I'm still obviously iffy about, the neural link is going to sit in my brain and then we don't have to communicate. I just have to look at you and then you get what I'm saying. But I think I'm excited about, I think on the long term, firstly, I want to be part of the upskilling movement. It'll be cool to like take all this knowledge and then be the one that kind of like fixes the delta gap. And similar to Amlan, actually, I mean, every time when there's a new technology that comes out, like I want to immediately try it. I like constantly talk to the GPT-4 app, and I'm like trying to create stuff. So maybe that. Maybe I'm a little too optimistic to not think about the negative stuff, which I think we have to like worry about.
Which is the conversation we're having, yeah.
And also like I think India's growth, I think that's something. AI is a big aspect of also like adding directly to the top line of the country. Right? So good place to be.
Yeah, good place to be. Yeah. And I mean, I think
What about you, Mayur, if we can ask you?
I think it's really interesting. First of all, to learn from experts like you guys, and this is what we're trying to break down, right? Because I'm not an expert in AI. I know things more on the fundamental level, like how it works. But today, I think after the session, it gave me a lot of insight. On a country level, I think what's exciting is India is in really a nice position in terms of how we could take this and actually catapult ourselves much ahead. And we have obviously the challenges of how it would impact jobs, but I think there is a lot more positive on this because there's more things we could develop with AI as on all the layers you said, right? So we're already there in some layers, and that's what's exciting. I want to see more fundamental AI infrastructure getting built, more manufacturing coming in, which eventually will create jobs. And I think
and tier 2 cities.
So we also have like a stable government recently, which is kind of getting these things together. Obviously, there's more scope to do it better. As you said, there are some gaps, and which is going to be addressed in the next couple of years. And I think, as we said earlier, businesses and companies will have innovation, and policy will always be catching up. But as long as it's catching up and helping, not regulate, but more promoting the businesses, and I think India is going to be in a really good place. And I think it's exciting times, and glad to be part of this conversation and to learn more from you guys. I hope that if there's more demand, we could probably do an episode 2 as well to discuss a bit more. But before we stop, do you guys have some recommendation of books, podcasts, which something else which people would be able to look into?
Yeah, I can. Go first.
I was gonna say maybe lesser podcasts because a lot of the bite-sized stuff is coming out quickly. So I would literally take all the AI infra companies, and if I could follow them on Twitter, on LinkedIn, I think that's a good way to start. Like Cohere, Amazon, obviously OpenAI, Microsoft, Google. I mean, they're all coming up with like amazing releases every month or so. And then I think thinking about, because you can feel like, oh my God, like I'm feeling overwhelmed. So like you have the stack in mind, and every time there's a new release, you know where it fits. right? Like, oh, when LLMs come out, their token size is now, let's say, oh, context windows move from, let's say, 100,000 tokens to 1 million tokens. Like, what should that mean, right? It just means like, hey, you can provide more input into the LLM, right? So like, if you have that basic understanding, I think that people will feel less overwhelmed. But yeah, I think that's more on the business side. But obviously, there's all the other stuff. Like every time Elon Musk talks about it at a conference,
I'm sure we're going to have more movies around AI, and we've already had this before, probably, which is also the reason why people are scared and worried, right? On one side, but if you look back at the movies we saw 15 years back, it showed a very different world. But right now, AI is actually used more in the background than what was shown in the movies, where it's shown more as robots and things like that. So a different perspective, and a lot of these things are happening in the background, which I think is great. That's how it should be. Socially, humans like to live like this, but AI is just going to enable them to live better lives. I think that's how I see it. Any recommendations from you, Amlan?
Yeah, let me give you some specific recommendations, right? Book, I was also coming up to speed on this. I'm like a lawyer and policy advisor trying to understand the technology, which I think is so important, as I explained earlier. So I recommend this book. It's called Artificial Intelligence for Thinking Humans by Melanie Mitchell. It's a really kind of explainer about how, neural networks works. You were asking earlier, how have we come to how did we go from AI, which has been around from 1950s to, the powerful LLMs of today, right? So it kind of traces that journey. So that helped me understand how AI works. But two is trying to understand where the conversation's at today with the people building the technology. So I really refer to podcasts for that. So I recommend, the Lex Friedman podcast. He's really been talking to all of the people from Meta and Google who are building this. So I really enjoy listening to Lex. Movies I think are a great source, because at least even as policymakers, and policy advisors, we have to think ahead to the future, right? We need to really have a science fiction kind of mindset to be able to say that's where things might go. It might not always happen, but you want to kind of think about where things are headed to be able to build laws for today. So
Terminator 2 Judgment.
Less that, just much more kind of intellectual. Like I like Ex Machina, this film, right?
Beautiful movie.
Really nice movie. I think that explores this idea. And then, on the policy side, there are people who kind of think and write about it. I could plug my own blog, maybe, if you're interested in these topics. Definitely check out Techlotopia. But there are people globally who are writing this. I follow Ben Evans, Ben, who writes Stratechery. It's another kind of newsletter. So I'm trying to curate my own feeds. I'm not on social media much. So I'm reading specific kind of people that I'm interested in, books that are long form, and podcasts that I can do when I'm in the gym or commuting and things like that.
Can I just, sorry, please finish, Anuj.
No,
I was going to say, I just want to add one more thing, which is I think figuring out what is your medium of learning as well. Like I think you love to let's say do long form, maybe on the newsletter stuff. Like I'm maybe more I like talking to people. One of the things that we were talking about offline is, hey, can we catch up every 6 weeks? And you tell me what's happening in the policy world, right? So figuring out, do you like video, audio, text, short form, long form, and then you double down on that?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, everyone has a different.
What do you like to do
I think
other than listen to citizen show podcasts? This could be a good primer. But what do you in your?
I think I listen to podcasts mostly. I think it's more easier because you always have time in commute and moving around. So that's more my let's say information consumption. So that's I normally listen to business podcasts, but you did recommend some for AI, which is. Which I will note it down to listen. But yeah, I mean, I think it's been a great conversation, guys. Amlan Mohanty, thank you so much.
Thanks, Mayur. I don't think you've ever heard you say my full name.
But it's always important to mention the full name in these. And I was trying to.
Remember my last name?
I was almost going to say Anirudh Narayan, and then he's going to get offended. I checked on LinkedIn. I was like, okay, Anirudh Narayan. Thanks so much. I think we had a great conversation, and hopefully this is going to be a episode which people will like and share, and and hopefully we can have another conversation if this is getting more interesting. Awesome.
Thank you for having us, Mayur.
Yeah, thank you.
Bommai.
Thank you.